Welcome back to the third video in the Angular Node MySQL login system video series. So far, we've created the signup UI in Angular with Angular Material and reactive forms, and we've also created the Node server, and we can hash the passwords in the database. So what I'd like to do in this video is connect the server and get that information from the client. So essentially we're going to be using HTTP requests with the help of RxJS and TypeScript to successfully create a user from the application. So first things first, let's open up the application, and in the app I'm going to create a new folder called models. And inside this models folder, I'm going to create a file called user with capital U, TypeScript to indicate that it's an interface. So I'm going to export this interface, user, and what a user will have is it will have the same characteristics and properties in which the database has been set up, namely ID, name, email, and password. So the ID is simply a number, the name is a string, the email is a string, and the password is also a hash string. So now we have this interface here, we can just close that up, and in the app module, so I'll just cancel this because we need to import something into the app module. So in the app module, what we'll do is we'll import the HTTP client module so we can make HTTP requests. And I'll just do this up here so we can import the HTTP client module, and that's going to be from @angular/common/HTTP. And of course we'll need to register that by importing that. So we can just import that here. Now just before I start the server, the client, I'll just create a service. So I'm going to create a service by running ng generate service in the services folder, which is yet to be created, and we can go ahead and just skip the test file by skip tests equal to true, and this should generate in the services folder. Where is it? Here. So we've got our components, models, and services, and we got this new service here, auth service. So in the auth service, since we now have access to the HTTP client module, what we can do here is we can import some of that functionality. So in particular, we want the HTTP client to make HTTP requests, and HTTP headers to put any associated headers data, in particular authorization and JSON format. JSON format in this case. And then later on authorization. So that is just from @angular/common/HTTP, and we can save that. And okay, we'll also just need the model that we just created, so we can import that user model, and that's from the models folder, which is just back one directory in models, and we can just get the user there like that. So what we can do now is, well, we need the functionality of the HTTP client, which is Angular service, so we need to inject that. So we can just say private, and we'll just call it HTTP to keep it short to reference, and we can reference it like that. And recall that in our HTML for the signup component, we have this signup function here, and that just simply logs it to the console. but we want to actually make the HTTP request. So to do that, we will create a signup function in the service, so signup, and what this is going to be is it's going to return an observable. So we're going to need the observable, and it's going to be of that type user. So we've got user, we've now got observable, which was auto imported, and I'll just organize it like this. So okay, so it's currently erroring, but that's to be expected. Now when we make the request, we don't have the ID, so we just need to omit the ID, but everything else in the user model will be sent. So we can do this using TypeScript, and we can just say, okay, we're going to sign up the user, which is a particular type, and we can just omit from the user the ID field. So now we can return a HTTP request, which will be used by the signup component, and this is achieved by returning this.http. So now we have using the HTTP client, and we can do a post request because that's what's being expected, and that's going to be for the user, and we need to make it to a certain URL. So just up here we can make a private property. I'll just call it URL, and this is where we created our endpoint to be. So on the server on localhost 3000, we go into the auth, and then we go into signup, and then that will be our URL that we're making the request to. So with that URL, we can pass that to the post request that we're making here. So that's done by this.url as the first parameter, and then we're going to pass in the JSON object for the user, omitting the ID of course, so we can just pass in user directly like that. And we will need some HTTP options here. So just below this private URL here, I can have our public property, and I'll just call this HTTP options, and this is going to return some headers for us, which will be of the type HTTP headers, and this will be we can have some headers here like this, and we can create some new HTTP headers by instantiating that object, and we want in particular the content type set equal to application.json, because that's the format that we're working with here. So I can save that, and then I'm able to pass in these HTTP options into the core. Now we're not done just yet. We do need to catch any errors that occur, and to do that we can just because we're dealing with RxJS, we can sort of pipe an observable to an observer into the pipeable operators to deal with any of those sorts of things. So another thing I want to do, because this is an observable, I want to well, firstly I'll just say .pipe, then I'll open up my parentheses here, and I'll just be using the first pipeable operator, and I'll need to import this of course. So let's see, from I think it's similar to this here, but it's from RxJS operators, I believe. So operators, and then that's going to be first. So that's the first method, which RxJS pipeable operator. And what this will do is it will make us not need to unsubscribe from this observable. It will just give us back the first response. So there's no need to make an ng on destroy and unsubscribe, or use the async pipe or some other alternative approach. And another thing we will need is the ability to catch any errors. So to handle that, we can have this catch error pipeable operator. Now, what we want to do to catch the error is we actually we want to call another service, an error handler service. And this hasn't been created just yet, but we're expecting this to be of the form this error handler service, and we're going to make a method on it called handle error. So I'm just going to go ahead and create that. So I can just run an RxJS services. And the reason I'm making a service for this is because we're going to have multiple HTTP requests, and it's better to abstract this rather than dealing with it in each and every case where we make a HTTP request. It's just more generic to be able to catch it and abstract it into a single service. So let's go ahead and create that error handler service, and we'll just skip the test as well. So we can set that equal to true, and then we'll come back to handling this error here. So in this error handler service, what we can do is, well, we're going to be dealing with observables, and we can just import the observable, and we can also import of, so we can map different responses to, or we can return an observable type based on a response, and they'll become clear in just a moment. But this is going to be a relatively simple service for what it does, and it's able to handle any service. And the way that's achieved is by well, we don't need this constructor either, but we can create this handle error function, and I'm just going to put this T here to indicate that it's a generic type, so it can take in any type, and it's going to have some sort of operation, so the HTTP request of interest, so that could be login or sign up, some sort of operation, and we'll just give that a default value of operation if that's not passed in for whatever reason. And we can have a result that we can pass in as well. So for example, if we're expecting an array to come back, we can, or an observable array, we can just set a safe value of just an empty array, and then it will just handle that error appropriately. So, okay. So what we can do here is we can say, okay, we need to return, so we're going to get some sort of error, and that's going to be passed in. So for that error, and that can be any type, we're expecting an observable back of that type that got passed in. And we can do that with this arrow function syntax here like this. And what I might do here is I might just do a console log, and I'll just do the backticks, so I can say, okay, so the operation that failed, and then we can have the corresponding error message that's associated with the error. And then what we can do is we can just return an observable of the type of the result, what we got passed into it as T. And note, if there's no result passed in, it'll be nullish. So in the case of an empty, like a string, we'll get the 2 quote mark strings, or just a null response back. It's optional, because in the case where we need to pass in as like an array or something like that. So more or less how this works is we have some sort of function which has the HTTP request, and we're just posting to the endpoint that we created. But if there's some sort of error or something occurs, we can catch that error, and that error is passed in with this catch error pipeable operator, and it's going to be passed to the error handler service. So we created this handle error function here, so we can handle that. And we need to pass a type in to that handle error. So whatever the type is, so in this case we're handling the type that there's an error with the user, and what we need to add in with that is either an operation and or a result. So if we leave them both blank, we'll get an operation, no result, and we don't necessarily need to put in a backup result here because we're just expecting something nullish to occur. So what we can do is we can just pass in the operation here, and for the operation I'll just use the same name as the function. So for the signup function, we can handle that, and of course we need to inject that in. So we can, in our constructor, inject that. So I'll just call this error handler service of the type error handler service, and they'll be auto imported for us. So okay, so with that, if there is an error of the type user, so we'll get this log back saying, okay, the operation signup has failed, and then it will have the particular error that got caught. So we don't have to, like, this catch error gets the error for us and passes it into this, and then that's where this error is coming from. So that gets passed in, and then what we can do is we can just return an observable of the type passed in. So we're expecting an observable of the type user back. So for the error relating to the user, this generic type will be that result, and then they'll be made into an observable. So this doesn't need to have the result passed in because they'll be picked up just by type inference and stuff like that. But if we were requesting a users, let's say, and we were expecting 5 users back and in an array form, then what we would do is we would pass in as a second parameter an empty array, and then it will return that result empty array of the type T, so an empty array of users of type users, and turn that into an observable and then handle that back to us if we had something like this. But we don't have that, so we can just handle the errors just like that, nice and simply. So with that, what we're able to do is we're able to make our request now. So let's go ahead and just start up our local host again with an npm start. And we'll just wait for that to load up. Okay, so I do have a couple of errors here. Let's see here. So I've spotted the error. I accidentally put the HTTP client module in the declarations, and this should actually be in the imports here. So if I go ahead and save that, we get our app just working again. And if we, type in some stuff here and we click sign up, we just get back our the values here. But what we want to do is use our auth service that we just created to connect the component, this method here in particular, to that functionality that we just created. So to do that, let's just go ahead and open inject the auth service, and in particular we need this sign up method here. So what we can do is we can inject that into the constructor with dependency injection.
may as well auto import that. Just put a space there to separate the Angular stuff to our stuff. And with that auth service here, we can call the function. So we can just say, instead of this here, we can say this dot auth service dot sign up, and this is going to take the values from that form that we created. So earlier we created this sign up form here, and the values of that will be the JSON object of that sign up form, which is of the type user emitting the value. And we can just go ahead and subscribe to this and note that it's only taking the first one, and we'll just write a little message to us in the console to say that we've received that. So with that, we should be able to create something. So let's go ahead and, I'll make this mrjohnpepping@gmail.com. Actually, I've got this plug in here for this, but let's just say I'll create something for this, and then I click sign up. Well, I get this message back, user registered, and that's what we created on the back end. So recall that in the back end here, I think it was in the controller here, we have this user registered after we've saved the data. So we save the data to the MySQL database, and the response will be in that JSON, the message user registered. And to retrieve that message, essentially we've created this auth service, which takes the endpoint and makes the post request to it, and then we get back that by subscribing to it, only taking the first one, of course. And that's the message that we get back logged to the console. So if we look into the database, we can see that we have this extra row here now. So it took that data and it has this hash password here. So we can't decrypt this has been hashed. But what we can do when we go on to the next video of checking it, checking the hash, is we can compare it to the hashed version that the password sends, and we'll see that in the next video. But just for the purposes of this video, I'll just see the catch error function working. So we spent up the time to create this error handler service, and it's a generic error handler service. It'll work for any of our HTTP operations, and it'll catch that. So yeah, it catches that type for this. And if I were to do something like in the auth service, like if I was to change this to XHTTP and then I was to do this, then what we'll get if I make the request, so let's just say I have something else like jono@gmail.com. Well, that's the first name, but if I change this to Jono and have this password here like this, and then I click sign up, well, we get this oh, okay, that's interesting. It's been blocked by cause. I suspect that's not to do with error, but here we get in the error handler service, sign up failed, HTTP failed, response for the particular route, and then that message associated with it unknown. And the application doesn't break. If I was to continue looking at other things, everything's still working, and if we look at the server's still running. And of course, if we were to create a email that already exists, well, so john@gmail.com, we would expect that our server not to break, but also nothing be sent back. So of course I have to change back the URL, and I suspect that because I put the X there rather than a different location, we got a different error. So let's just put it here, like here. not now, and just see if we get a different sort of error here. And okay, so just for the purposes of this, I'll just say, just copy that. And okay, so that's interesting. But what we can do is we can just revert it back to a proper URL. And if we were to try, say, choosing an email that already exists, so john@gmail.com, password, we can see we get no message logged here, which indicates that nothing has been added to the database, and most importantly, a server didn't crash or anything like that, and also our application is still functional. So that's how we can make HTTP requests using some RxJS and TypeScript, and now we've successfully connected our backend with the ability to sign up. We've created the user interface with Angular Material, and we've connected to that, making API requests. So we've covered the sign up functionality for this login system. In the next video, I'd like to work on the login functionality, and in particular the login functionality on the back end, and then I'll hook that up to the front end as well. So stay tuned for that next video, and I'll see you then. Cheers.